Hello, my name is Simon Kemp from the French department at Oxford University, and this is a short presentation on reading time and tense in French literature. I'm going to tell you how tenses are used in storytelling in French. I'm going to give you some tips about how you can use reading literature in French to improve your command of French tenses. And I'm also going to tell you how close attention to the tenses being used in telling a story can help you with the analysis of the text that you're reading. So here are three sentences extracted from three novels in French, illustrating the main three tenses that French uses to tell its stories. If you would like to, you can pause the video here for a few seconds, read through the sentences and work out what those three tenses are, and then I will continue in a second by talking you through them. So here are the tenses highlighted. In Françoise Sagan's Bonjour Tristesse, we have je prie, je frottais, and elle s'éteignit, all of which are the passé simple, the simple past tense. From Joseph Joffre's Un sac de billes, we have la bille roule, je préfère, and je la garde, the present tense. And then lastly from Albert Camus' L'étranger, we have j'ai crispé, and la gâchette a cédé, the trigger gave way, which is the passé composé, the perfect tense. And these three are the main tenses that are used for telling stories in French. Until the 20th century, the default tense for telling stories was the passé simple, the one like Françoise Sagan, and it's still the most common one for storytelling. The present tense is sometimes used within passé simple stories for particular scenes to give a sense of real immediacy there, but it's increasingly common just to tell whole stories in the present tense in French, and more common than it is in English. And then lastly, the passé composé there is in meaning identical to the passé simple in the Françoise Sagan example. However, the passé simple is much more usual in written French to tell stories with. The passé composé is normally something that's restricted to spoken French. So if you're telling a story to your friend orally, you'd use the passé composé. Albert Camus uses it in L'étranger to kind of give the impression that Meursault is telling the story to us, as if we were actually listening to his voice. So, my first point then, French stories normally use one of these three tenses to recount events. The choice of tense affects how the story feels to the reader. Passé simple as the default tense, which doesn't really express anything other than this is the normal way to tell a story. The present tense, which is increasingly normal, but does offer this increased sense of immediacy of things happening now. And the passé composé, which has this sense of spoken language, and so can make things seem more sincere, more honest, more spontaneous, perhaps. Here are two more quotations, one from Camus' L'étranger again, and one from a novel called Un secret by Philippe Grimbert, to illustrate the other tense, which is commonly used when you're narrating stories in the past. So again, do pause the video for a second, read through them, pick out the tenses, and see if you can work out what tense is being used and why. So here are the tenses. We have en déversé in Albert Camus' L'étranger, which, as I said before, is the main storytelling tense, the passé composé. And we've also got a pluperfect tense in c'était arrangé. But the ones I want to draw attention to are these three imperfect tenses, imparfait, se tenait par les bras, il lançait des plaisanteries, elle riait en détournant la tête. And we have the same tense, the imperfect tense, in the Grimbert, elle me préparait un chocolat sur le réchaud, je le dégustais à petites gorgées. And whenever you have a story that's being told in the past tense, whether it's in the passé composé or the passé simple, you will also see a good deal of imparfait, imperfect tenses being used. And they're used within past tense storytelling for a slightly different purpose, generally for one of these two purposes. In the Albert Camus example, as you might have seen if you took the time to read through the quotation, we've got a descriptive scene. At this point, Meursault is sitting on his balcony, watching what was happening as in the street below, and so girls were holding each other by the arm. Guys were throwing jokes at them, and the girls were laughing. So rather than a series of events here, we have a description of an ongoing situation. This is what was happening through this period of time when Meursault was watching the scene. And from Grimbert's Un Secret, we have the other use of the imperfect tense, which is for a repeated action in the past. So each time the narrator visits this person, she would prepare for him, or she used to prepare for him, a hot chocolate, and he would taste it with little sips. So the two uses of the imperfect tense in past tense narrative are to describe ongoing states, what was happening in the street below, or repeated actions, what would happen or what used to happen each time he visited. Here's one more passage from L'Étranger. It's from the first page of the novel, and what I want to draw attention to here is the variety of tenses being used, and the way that, if you take the trouble to pay careful attention to the tenses, it can be very useful in unravelling what's going on in the story, particularly if there's something complicated going on in terms of the timeline of the story. Looking closely at the tenses can help you work out how things all fit together. So again, take a moment to read it through and pick out the verbs and their tenses, and then I'll take you through it. So here are the tenses. We have je prendrai, j'arriverai, je pourrai, et je rentrerai in the future tense, and also a little bit further down, ce sera, also in the future. We have the novel's main narrative tense, j'ai demandé and j'ai pris, the passé composé there in the past. And other verbs in the past tense, we have pouvait, était, and faisait in the imparfait. And then we've also got one in red, present tense, c'est un peu, and then one in brown, we have the future in the past, things will have put on, tout aura revêtu. So what I want to draw attention to here is that here are all those verbs in the order that they turn up in the narrative. I will take the bus at 2 o'clock, I will arrive in the afternoon, I will be able to watch, I will return tomorrow evening. Then we head into the past with I asked for 2 days of leave from my boss, he wasn't able to refuse them with an excuse like that. It is a bit like mother wasn't dead. After the funeral it will be a finished business, everything will have put on a more official air. And then I took the bus at 2 o'clock, it was very hot. So that's the order they appear in the narrative. If we actually rearrange this to look at the order in which these events occur in Meursault's life, in the actual chronology of things happening, rather than the order of things being told, it's very different. So in the timeline of Meursault's life, the first thing that happens is that he asked for leave, and that his boss couldn't refuse him his leave. The moment now, as he's telling the story, is as it feels that things are a little unreal. And then taking the bus appears in two different tenses, that he says at one point he's going to take the bus, and then he also says, I have taken the bus. The weather when he was taking the bus is that it was very hot, and then he's looking forward to the future of what will happen when he gets to the old people's home where his mother has died. I will arrive in the afternoon, I will be able to watch over the body, I will return tomorrow evening, everything will be finished business, and everything will have put on a more official air. So what you can see there is that there's quite a complicated timeline, both in the order that things happen, but also actually in the order that he tells the story. That what you might not have noticed in looking through it for the first time is that he tells the story from two different time points. When he starts off, he's telling us the story from a time before he's taken the bus to the old people's home, which is why he says je prendrai. in the example 1 there. And then, without really telling us he's doing that, he actually skips forward, and the later part of that extract was told from a point later in time, from a point, in fact, after his mother's funeral. And that's why the same event, taking the bus, is told both in the future and in the past tense there. So if you put it all together, you can use this close examination of tenses both to unravel the complexity of the timeline in Meursault's life, working out what happens before everything else, and you can also use it to get a grip on the rather peculiar way that Meursault's decided to tell his story. He's telling us almost as if he's writing a diary at intervals through the events that he's experiencing. So you can see there in Je prendrai l'autobus in the first line, J'ai pris l'autobus in the last line there, that two different times of narrating are being used to tell this story. So a close analysis of tense can unravel complex chronology in a story. Lastly, one last example, I want to talk about how tense can be used for other things other than chronology. This is another example from Philippe Grimbert's Un Secret, which also plays some interesting games with tenses. Most of the story is told, the time of narrating the story is told retrospectively by the narrator, who is in fact Philippe Grimbert, who looks back to his childhood, and he tells that in the past tense. And then inset within that is the story that he discovers of the terrible thing that happened to his parents, who were Jewish people on the run from the Nazis during the war. And as soon as we head back into his parents' story, it actually switches from the past into the present tense. And so the story of the parents, even though it's further back in time, is told with the real immediacy of the present tense. With one exception. That after the event which forms the secret of the story, which I'm not going to reveal to you, has happened, for a short period, this present tense story of his parents on the run from the Nazis switches into this tense, the pluperfect tense. S'était effondré, s'était senti, avait choisi, avait déposé. Why does it do that? It's nothing to do with any change in the chronology of it, that this is the thing that happens next in the story, and we've been told the story in the present tense up to this point. The reason he uses the pluperfect tense here is for the mood of the story, that from a kind of breathless run away from the Nazis, event after event, something terrible has happened, which I will leave you to discover for yourself, and we are now in the aftermath of it, and all of the characters are out of resources of what to do. Something has happened which cannot be put right, and so to give this sense of nothing more to be done, of the characters sort of washed up and without any further choices, it switches from the present tense back not just into the past tense but into the pluperfect, as if we are now in a situation for which nothing can be changed and nothing can be remedied. So a shift in the main storytelling tense, or an unusual choice of tense, may be for other reasons than chronology. It's not always just to tell you what happened before and what happened after everything else. So that was my little run through the use of tense in French narrative. Here are the 4 points I wanted to make from it. That the passé simple, the présent, and the passé composé are usually usually used to recount events, and the choice of tense affects the feel of the story. The imperfect is used within past tense narratives to describe ongoing states or repeated actions. If you take the time and the trouble to explore the tenses used in the verbs in detail, that can help you unravel complex chronology, both in what happens in the story and sometimes in the way the story is being told. And then a shift in the main storytelling tense, or an unusual choice of tense, may be for other reasons than chronology. Thank you for listening. I hope you found that interesting, and I hope it will be helpful in your studies of the French language and French literature.